Both engines are on fire, 30,000 feet in the air, no power, no thrust, nothing. The cockpit is filling with toxic smoke, instruments are failing one by one, 150 people are sitting behind you, and every single one of them thinks they are about to die. What do you do? Most pilots never train for this moment, because most pilots never survive it. This is the story of the man who did. It began like every other flight, engines humming, altitude climbing, passengers settling in for the journey ahead. Nobody on board had any idea that deep inside the left engine, a crack had been forming, silent, invisible, growing. Then at 30,000 feet, it happened. A sound like a cannon shot tore through the aircraft. The left engine exploded into a ball of fire. Within seconds the fire jumped, the right engine caught, and just like that, both engines were gone. In the cockpit the pilot felt it before he heard it. The controls went dead in his hands, the thrust disappeared, the noise stopped. In aviation there is a term for what happened next, dead stick. It means you are no longer flying a plane. You are falling in a very expensive metal tube. Only question left is how fast. A modern airliner without engines loses altitude at roughly 2,000 feet per minute. At 30,000 feet that gives you approximately 15 minutes. 15 minutes to find a runway, 15 minutes to calculate the glide, 15 minutes to save 150 lives. The clock started. The smoke hit next, thick, black, toxic. It poured through the ventilation and filled the cockpit in seconds. The pilot could barely see his instruments, his eyes were burning, his lungs were burning. A lesser man would have panicked. He did not panic. He put on his oxygen mask. He called air traffic control, and his voice was completely calm. Mayday, 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 both engines lost, declaring emergency, requesting immediate vectors to nearest runway. The controller on the other end of that radio said he will never forget how calm that voice sounded, because he knew exactly what was happening up there. And he was terrified. The mathematics of what came next were brutal. The pilot had to calculate in real time. With burning eyes, in a smoke-filled cockpit, with no engine power, exactly how far his aircraft could glide. Too steep and the plane stalls, 150 people die. Too shallow and he overshoots the runway, 150 people die. The margin for error was measured not in miles, not in meters, but in seconds. He had one shot, and he knew it. In the cabin behind him passengers were gripping armrests. Children were crying. People were praying. The plane was completely silent, except for the wind. No engine hum, no mechanical roar, just the sound of 150 people holding their breath. One flight attendant later said it was the quietest and most terrifying sound she had ever heard. A sky full of silence. The runway appeared through the smoke-stained windshield, too high, coming in too high. The pilot made a decision in a fraction of a second. He dropped the flaps, increased the descent angle, adjusted the glide path by pure instinct and 20 years of experience. The plane dropped faster, the ground rushed up, the runway grew larger, 100 feet, 50 feet, 20 feet, the wheels touched, hard, loud, real. The plane screamed down the runway on nothing but momentum and brakes, and came to a stop 200 meters from the end, silence. Then one person started clapping, then another, then the entire cabin erupted. Every single soul on board was alive. When investigators later reviewed the black box recordings, they found something remarkable. In the most terrifying 15 minutes of aviation history, the pilot's voice never once cracked. His hands never once shook on the controls. His decisions, every single one of them, were textbook perfect. Under conditions that would have broken most human beings, he was a machine, cold, precise, unshakable. One investigator said in 30 years of reading black box transcripts, he had never seen anything like it. This incident changed aviation forever. New fire suppression systems were mandated. Glide ratio emergency training became standard for every commercial pilot on Earth. Dead stick landing simulations are now part of every airline's annual certification. Because of one man who refused to panic. When panic was the only logical response, 150 people went home that day, 150 people hugged their families, ate dinner, slept in their beds, because one pilot kept his hands steady and his mind clear when everything around him was on fire. Remember this the next time you board a plane and feel nervous. Somewhere in that cockpit sits someone who was trained their entire life. For the 15 minutes nobody ever wants to see, this was the pilot who landed a burning plane with 0 engines and saved every single soul on board. He never called it a miracle, he called it his job. If this story stayed with you, share it with someone who was afraid of flying, and subscribe, because there are hundreds more stories like this one. Stories of ordinary people who did extraordinary things when the world needed them most.